Has Hollywood tricked you? You've seen fight movies and actors with chiseled six-pack abs. You saw this with Bruce Lee and Jean-Claude Van Damme. But why are there fighting world champions who are overweight, who have dad bods? And why is there so many different body types in mixed martial arts? The truth is, each physique provides special, unique benefits that are rarely spoken about. So today, we're putting these physiques to the test, and we will finish by unveiling the best body type for fighting, the wrestling physique. Wrestlers are some of the toughest athletes on the entire planet. It's no coincidence that there have been more MMA champions with a wrestling background versus any other combat sporting discipline. They're jacked, explosive, and able to produce immense amounts of strength to ragdoll their opponents. You won't see these guys pulling guard or butt scooting like some jiu-jitsu athletes. They will come at you relentlessly and impose their will on you. Used to the grind from a young age and a sporting culture where quitting means cowardice, wrestlers are modern-day Spartan warriors. They're built different. As a result, so are their physiques. Huge traps, forearms and hands built like vice grips. There's no better example for this than the soldier of God, Yoel Romero. His traps and neck are so robust, he just eats head kicks like they're nothing. Romero grew up in the harshest conditions in Cuba. Dirt poor, he would have to sneak out to pursue his boxing dreams, against his father's wishes. The Cuban sporting curriculum builds boys into men from a young age, and state officials saw Yoel's natural talent as a wrestler, and he turned those talents into a silver medal at the 2000 Sydney Olympics. Yoel isn't just a high-level wrestler. His explosiveness, even into his late 30s and 40s, has created a monster with some of the most violent finishes in UFC history. Yoel has even tested himself at some of the toughest wrestling training rooms on planet Earth, one of note being Mahashkala in Dagestan. Little did he know, one of the most dominant MMA grapplers of all time was watching him in the background. It was a 14-year-old Khabib Nurmagomedov. The common thread among both of these men is being born into combat sports training. Khabib's dad, Abdulmanap, was an army veteran and also a high-level combat sambo and judo practitioner who famously insisted Khabib wrestle a bear at 9 years old.
When father put me with put me wrestling with bear, when I told him, hey, this bear tried to bite me, and I remember when he told me like, bite him back, no problem. You have to wrestle, you have to keep...
Combine this with Dagestan's high altitudes and a sporting curriculum where boys would be training twice a day, and you have the recipe to develop one of the most elite mixed martial arts grapplers of all time. This dominance followed him when he made the move to American Kickboxing Academy.
He is the only person that's never lost a sparring session, never in his life, never been submitted, never been close to being submitted in actual MMA sparring.
So what physical qualities make wrestlers such a force to be reckoned with? The sport of wrestling places a large emphasis on strength and conditioning. This is the secret to maximizing their freakish physical qualities. The ability to stuff takedowns and throw grown men over your head requires a high level of maximal strength. This is commonly developed using Zercher squats, pendlay rows, and heavy strict pull-ups. Couple this with another secret ingredient that is rarely spoken about in bodybuilding practices, and that is isometric strength. A large portion of grappling involves controlling your opponent with minimal movement. Khabib has some of the best isometric hip control on planet Earth, and Gordon Ryan is another example of someone who transfers his isometric strength into his anaconda-like suffocating ground game. These training qualities can be built using isometric squeezes, and you can isolate the upper and lower body separately to build these qualities. Now let's contrast this to the striker. The snipers of mixed martial arts. The best knockout artists in MMA have physiques that interestingly share very similar traits. Firstly, what is called the ape index. That is your arm span and reach relative to your height. Conor McGregor, Israel Adesanya, Sugar Sean O'Malley, Alex Pereira, none of these athletes are extremely muscled like their wrestling counterparts. However, they all have exceptional reaches in comparison to their weight class. To maximize and leverage their reach advantage, striking specialists keep their body fat percentages low, some even relying on heavy weight cuts to maximize being as tall and as rangy as possible for their weight division. We saw this with the featherweight McGregor era, and even Alex Pereira is huge for the middleweight division. Apart from their wiry, shredded physiques, they also share a lot of other physical qualities. Not only can they produce elite levels of rotational power, but they can do it over and over and over again, which is explosive repeatability. They leverage tendon elasticity and are extremely agile and bouncy, and can explode at any moment and put you to sleep. Having large degrees of muscle mass can be disadvantageous for a striker, and we often see bodybuilders mocked for their stiffness and inability to move fluidly. More muscle mass means more energy requirement. If these gains in muscle aren't trained in a way where you're also increasing strength and power, it can be a disadvantage and lead you to gas out quickly. We saw this with McGregor's fights against Nate Diaz. He went up 2 weight divisions, and we also saw his invincibility get taken right in front of our very eyes via Nate Diaz's rear naked choke. So now begs the question, can you develop the ballistic and power outputs of elite strikers? And luckily, the answer is yes. And if you want to learn more, click the link in the description. All right, let's shift gears and delve into a world where appearances can be deceiving. In a sport where shredded physiques dominate the conversation, it's time to challenge the status quo. Look closely at the heavyweight division and you'll notice something intriguing. Many of these fighters aren't the poster boys for six-pack abs. Can being overweight and what most would consider fat actually be an advantage? And when we start discussing the big boy weight divisions, there can be some benefit to it. If you look at a lot of the heavyweight fighters, they aren't necessarily shredded to the bone. Yes, you have your genetic freaks like Francis Ngannou, who manages to have a six-pack at 260 pounds. However, Stipe Miocic, Cain Velasquez, Daniel Cormier, even John Jones was heavily ridiculed by the MMA community by looking out of shape, before he then dismantled Cyril Gane in a breeze within a round, which goes completely against our expectations of you needing to look shredded to be a good fighter. When we discuss the heavier divisions, having additional mass can be very advantageous for both knockout power and being harder to control in grappling scenarios. Punching power is heavily dictated by momentum. Mass of the moving limb plays a crucial role along how quickly you can move the arm or leg. The heavyweight division is also a unique situation where you can be fighting someone 30 pounds heavier, which is the equivalent of fighting someone 2 weight classes above at lighter weights. So being as heavy as possible can also be a huge advantage. And now for the moment you've been waiting for. What is the best body type for mixed martial arts? This is what I refer to as the hybrid fighter. Imagine if you could have devastating knockout power and explosiveness whilst also being able to go for 5 rounds non-stop. Many strikers who are fast twitch dominant gas out in the later rounds. We see this all the time. Ngannou, McGregor.
Obviously, the guy's super fucking talented. Obviously, he rises to the occasion. Obviously, he handles pressure as good as anybody alive. But there have been moments in his fights where he's faded. And not faded like a world champion. Faded like a guy who's got a flaw. Like you've got a hole in his game.
Hybrid fighter is an extremely rare athlete. However, there are 2 that stand out that fit this exact mold. That is Alexander Volkanovski and George St. Pierre.
But you're a fast twitch too.
I feel like I've got this really good balance.
Middle ground.
Yeah, I'm in this middle ground where I've got that cardio, but I've got the explosiveness.
Volkanovski was previously a semi-professional rugby player who would tackle and take on guys as big as Brock Lesnar. He weighed 200 pounds at the time and is now the featherweight division champion and arguably the best featherweight of all time. He was also the first fighter in the UFC to make Islam Makhachev look human and even out-wrestled him in certain parts of the fight. Not only does Alex have immense maximal strength and grinding wrestling abilities, but he can fight at a pace and volume that keeps up with Max Holloway, who statistically throws the most strikes and volume in UFC history. This blend of elite endurance as well as strength makes Volkanovski a once-in-a-generation fighter and in the greatest of all time conversation. Sitting with him at the GOAT table is also George St. Pierre, who shares very similar attributes. Starting with a striking background in Kyokushin karate, George managed to blend his striking proficiency with wrestling and grappling in the art of what John Danaher calls shoot boxing.
But it was in his shoot boxing training, which he himself largely developed. Remember, George started at a time when MMA was pretty damn young.
You're gonna adapt or you're gonna die. Literally.
He dismantled D1 wrestlers and other wrestling dominant fighters with his unique ability to not only strike with power and devastation, but also ground and pound dominance when the fight hit the floor. He had a relentless pace and pressure that suffocates anyone he steps in the cage with. What do you think is the best body type for mixed martial arts? Is it the chubby Cormier build, the Romero no-neck build, the shredded Strikers build, or is it the hybrid fighter who can do it all? Leave your comments below and let's see what you all think.